Well, hello everyone. Today in our mental fitness class, we're going to be talking about the Stickler saboteur in depth. And before we get into details, I just want to remind you that everything that we talk about in mental fitness is created by Shirzad Chamine, and it's based on his Positive Intelligence, the book, and the program. And so I run boot camps for the Positive Intelligence program, and I'm going through the process of getting certified in the Positive Intelligence program. So this is our agenda today. We're going to talk about the Stickler saboteur in depth, how the saboteur develops, the characteristics, the thoughts, the feelings, the justification lies. And what that means is, what are the thoughts in your head that are being produced by this saboteur and our lies, and causing you to engage in ineffective behavior? What is the impact of the saboteur on you and others? And how do you coach yourself to shift? And what are some things that you can do? So let's start by talking about how the Stickler saboteur develops. So usually these are children who are naturally organized and self-disciplined. They enjoy and see beauty in order and the organizations of things. So you might see them in their rooms really taking to putting toys back in a bucket, or organizing things by color as they get older, and really just enjoying the aesthetic pleasingness of that. These children tend to have a sense of right and wrong, which is pretty clear, and they have a strong desire to be good or do things correctly or right. Because of that, they tend to be rather sensitive of negative judgments of others. So they don't want to be told that they're doing things wrong, and that's very distressing to them. And so often they'll start developing order as a way to make themselves feel better. And that's when it goes beyond sort of regular fun professionalism and order, and it becomes an extreme and turns into saboteur behavior, is when the order is begun to use obsessively. I have to have everything organized in order to feel good. Otherwise, I'm feeling anxious and I'm just not feeling right. They may, and not always, but they may have come from a chaotic or anxiety producing environment. And so creating order in their little world or realm has felt like a small degree of control. So I have some clients who have this saboteur, and they may have been grown up in alcoholic families, and being able to create order around themselves has protected them from this world of chaos. I've had other clients with this particular saboteur who've grown up in very autocratic families, where there was a strong sense of right and wrong conveyed to them. And so that household might have been very orderly to an extreme. So you kind of have two different types of households where the saboteur may have grown out of. So the characteristics of a Stickler saboteur: perfectionist, punctual, strong need for self-control and self-restraint, tends to work overtime to make up for others' sloppiness or laziness, cleaning up the messes of others. So they get just so frustrated with people not doing things right that if someone cleaned the kitchen but left drops on the counter, they might go and wash the dishes over again after someone's done it, or do chores over again after a child hasn't done them correctly. They tend to be highly critical of self and others. They're highly sensitive to criticism. They can feel irritable and tense, and they have strong opinions of what's right and wrong. They really have their own belief systems. Now, I know I have a picture of a Catholic nun here because that's kind of a great stereotype sometimes, but you don't have to be Catholic or religious to have a Stickler saboteur. You can have a Stickler saboteur and have any belief system. But generally, if you have a Stickler saboteur, your belief system you feel very strongly about, and you feel that your opinion is right and other opinions are wrong. So you have a very clear sense of the rightness of what you believe in. And because of that, when you see others making what you perceive to be wrong decisions, you can come across as very sarcastic And you may not realize how hurtful this is to others, but I actually had a client with a stickler saboteur whose whole team ganged up. I've actually had a couple whose whole team ganged up on them because they felt personally insulted by the sarcasm and what they felt to be insulting comments. So that's where people with the stickler saboteur get in trouble, especially if they're leaders, is when they get frustrated with imperfection in their employees, the comments that come out of their mouth tend to be very cutting and disdainful, and those are not forgotten. So sometimes the group can sort of gang up and dethrone you, which is not fun at all. The thoughts of a stickler: right is right and wrong is wrong. I know the right way, and if you can't do it perfectly, just don't do it at all. They're just exasperated with others lack standards. They tend to constantly feel like they need to be more organized and methodical than others so that things get done. So they don't trust anyone else to be as organized or methodical as they are. And they hate mistakes in themselves and others. The feelings associated with a stickler saboteur: constant frustration and disappointment with yourself and with others for not living up to ideal standards. So that puts you in stress mode a lot of the time. Anxious that others will mess up the order and balance that you've created. So you might be working in a group and you might have created something perfect, and then you have people getting in there with all their creative ideas and sort of messing up the order of things. And that can be really frustrating. Again, you can make what I would call snarky comments when someone says something that you deem to be just ridiculous, wrong, stupid, etc. And you may not be aware that your comments are being received that way. But you do probably feel a lot of anger and frustration that you try to hold down because you don't want to show up as angry and frustrated. So often that will show up as tension in your body. And so you'll feel tense a lot of the time. Excuse me. So the justification lies. What are the lies that the saboteur tells you? This is a personal obligation. It's up to me to fix whatever mess I'm encountering. So not only being compelled to fix the messes, and I have a siren in my background. So I was thinking I was going to mute it, but I'm guessing it'll be biased by the time I mute it. So perfectionism is good. So they don't see perfectionism as necessarily an insult, and they don't even think of themselves as perfectionists because they so easily see all the things that they don't do perfectly. And plus, getting things organized really beautifully, like these tools, that vision of order really makes them feel good. So there's nothing wrong with it. And in general, there isn't anything wrong with this beauty and order. It's just when it becomes a compulsion and it gets in your way that it becomes a problem. But the saboteur will tell you that it's good, and it's also good to impose. The other lie is that there's usually a clear right and a clear wrong way to do things. And I usually know how things should be done and the right way to do things. And it's just ridiculous to me that anyone would want to do things the quote unquote wrong way. So this idea that there's no right or wrong seems like silliness to someone who has a strong stickler saboteur. The impact on self and others. So we already talked about the sarcastic comments and the insults, just a tone of voice that can really get you in trouble, especially if you're a manager. Causes rigidity and reduces flexibility in dealing with change and others' different styles. So when you're so sure that you know the right way, then it is very difficult for you to be open to other ways of doing things. And so if you have other people on your team, you'll often be very frustrating to them because you'll have a very clear sense of what you think is right, and you won't have a lot of tolerance for their opinions. You'll also have a hard time dealing with changes because organizations are always changing. And once you get a system down that feels right to you, kind of the messiness of moving to a new system can just be really frustrating. And so you tend to feel a lot of anxiety and frustration and cause it to others as well, because your emotions are infectious. So when other people are around you, they tend to feel more tense, more stressed, and more frustrated. And then you could be living with a lot of resentment, anxiety, and self-doubt, but you're also causing others to feel resentment towards you, anxiety, and self-doubt, especially if they report to you. They often give up because they get to this point where nothing they do is enough for you. And so they'll end up disengaging because they don't believe it's possible to please you. And so that can be really frustrating also if you're a manager or a supervisor. So what can you do about this? What can you do to intercept the stickler saboteur? Well, one of the most impactful exercises that I'm able to use with my stickler clients, and this is one of Shirzad's favorite, is using the 80-20 rule. So he forces people that have a stickler saboteur who are pretty committed to doing everything perfectly, and has you create two buckets: a 20% bucket of things where the highest possible quality really does matter, but then an 80% bucket of things where good enough is good enough. And so the big challenge for the stickler is you want to do 80% of your work. A B is good enough. Even a B minus or a C is good enough most of the time for 80% of what you do. And that's going to be very, very hard to lean into. But what's important about that is if you can really think about the 80-20 rule, which is 20% of what I do creates 80% of my results, and you can identify the 20% that's most important. What ends up happening is that gives you the time and energy to really focus on that 20% and do an excellent job at it. Whereas most people with a stickler saboteur, what I've found is they end up actually making far more mistakes than are tolerable because they're spending 20 hours in a day trying to get everything right. And they go down these paths that take up hours trying to get things right that are minor. So that if they can clearly distinguish the difference between where good enough is good enough and where quality really does matter, then you have the time and energy to really focus on that quality stuff. And you could be pleasantly surprised that people usually aren't going to judge you on the stuff that's minor. So one example of that is one person was talking about her stickler, and she was talking about how she had a presentation she had to do. And there were already some okay pictures in the presentation, but she just got caught up on this idea that she could come up with pictures that were better. And she spent 3 hours searching for a picture that kind of conveyed the idea just a little bit better. And that was a real waste of 3 hours that she could have been using doing things that are more important. And so she really understood that, but kind of navigating that change is the big challenge for the stickler. So what are some other things that you can do if you have a strong stickler saboteur? One of the things to really pay attention to is the brutality of that constant judge or stickler. If it's that self-judgment, it usually is eating you alive, and you may not even be aware of it. Also, the fact that you are conveying your judgment towards others. Now, you may think you're only judging yourself and you're not judging others, but generally you are judging others if you're judging yourself. And so others around you feel judged all the time, and that makes them feel demeaned. So what is this costing you? So these are some things to think about. The lie. What is the stickler's promise? What is the paradox? That higher quality, order, and organization actually leads to peace of mind. But the interesting thing is that people who have the stickler saboteur probably have the lowest level of peace of mind of many of the other 9 saboteurs. I would guess that people with hypervigilant also don't have a lot of peace of mind, but stickler has very little peace of mind because there's always this frustration and anxiety. So thinking about that, then what you want to do is really start thinking about what is the cost of having to always be right. And that's a tough thing to consider, but it's an important thing to reflect on. Now, one of our Sage Powers Innovate has a fun game associated with it called the Yes and game. And the philosophy behind this game is every idea is at least 10% right. So that's another thing that someone with a strong stickler saboteur can practice is the yes and game. So instead of getting frustrated with someone who you believe is wrong, try to find what's the 10% of their idea or their thinking or what they're representing. What's the 10% that's right? And that curiosity can get you in a different frame of mind and a different emotional energy. And so instead of showing up to others like you're rigid and not open to change, what you will show up to others is that you're curious and open to change. And that's a huge shift. So using that yes and game or that idea that 10% of what everybody else has to say is right, and my job is to find that 20%, will really help you ease into more of a sage energy, which you want to be in so that you can be infecting those around you with that calm instead of that sense of being judged. So another way to intercept the stickler saboteur is to notice the impact of the stickler's constant frustration and disappointment within yourself and others in your body. Explore the idea that brutal self-criticism leads to oversensitivity to criticism from others, leading to reluctance to truly seek and benefit from feedback. Stay with seeking perfect order if you'd like, because it is beautiful, but reframe what perfect order is. What is perfect about you being so imperfect? What would be the issue if you were actually able to be perfect? So those are some interesting questions to ask yourself. If you were perfect, what would actually show up? And what is perfect about others being imperfect? So really what we're doing here is we're saying what's perfect about being imperfect. In my coaching school, we used to call this perfect present. So every present moment is perfect. Find the perfection in the present moment. Another story that I tell from my heritage, which is Persian, is that we have a lot of Persian carpets. And I was told the story once that every crafter who makes a Persian carpet intentionally weaves an error into the Persian carpet design, which is very intricate and complex, but they intentionally weave an error because they want to honor God and have humility and say that nobody is perfect and nobody is as perfect as God. So that's kind of another way to think about developing the humility and the appreciation for imperfection. So you can go for order, but you can also see beauty in imperfection. These are all tough shifts. So it is a journey. And so what I'm going to do right now is stop the recording so that those of you that are here live on the call, we can have a discussion about it. But if you're watching the recording, some things to think about is, do you know somebody who has the stickler profile, and how does this show up as you observe them? And then think about yourself and how the stickler shows up for you, because we all really kind of have all the saboteurs inside us to some degree. And, where does this show up for you in your life, and what might you want to do to intercept this saboteur and shift to sage?